It is scary how accurate the movie I, Robot is looking to be. It's eerily accurate as to how close it is to what's happening in today's world. It's such an underrated movie. I was watching it a couple nights ago and it reminded me to kind of make this little series where we talk about robotics in the next 10 years. Because I, Robot takes place in 2035. And the first thing you see are robots that are delivering packages, walking dogs, or, taking out the trash or doing garbage. The robots are doing simple tasks that humans don't want to do. In fact, there's many of them walking around alongside the humans. Also, all the cars are self-driving. It's very accurate. And there's no flying cars, which is also good to see. And the vibe you get in the beginning is that the robots are very happy, and the people love the robots. They're very accepting of the robots and on technology in general. And the robots themselves are hardwired with laws in them, logical laws that they must abide, right? Don't injure anybody and obey a human as long as it doesn't, conflict with the first law. So there's this aura of trust in the public that people have, gained by implementing these laws and safety protocols in these robots. But the downside to that is that nobody ever thought that the robots would ever do harm to them. And this is what the movie explores. Now, in the movie, there are millions of robots, and they do lots of things and lots of tasks. And there's a new update of robots called NS5s that were going to be implemented into the public. They're going to be more sophisticated than the previous generation. But the coders behind the robots, they recognize that there's something called ghosts in these machines. There's like these random segments of code that give rise to some weird behaviors in the robots. Like they start to become creative. They start displaying signs of consciousness. In one of the parts of the movie, Will Smith's character gets knocked down by one of the robots, and the robot says, "What am I?" The engineers are beginning to recognize that robots, they don't stand alone in their empty space or cold, dark space. They kind of huddle together like humans do, right? So they're noticing that the robots are becoming more human-like. So it's like, it raised the question, at what point does a neural network or, lines of code or a logical framework, when does that become consciousness? When's that point? And when do ethics comes into the picture? Shouldn't robots be ethical and have some kind of sense of empathy for humans? And this was perfectly highlighted by a story of Will Smith's character. He was in a car accident with another lady, a young lady, and the robot was going to save them, but the robot picked to save Will Smith over the young girl. And the reason why is because the robot did a logical assessment and said Will Smith had a 45% chance of survival, but the girl only had 11% chance. And after that moment, Will Smith's character was just so mad at the robots, and he kind of was so just superstitious of their existence. He didn't like them. He was uncomfortable with them for that reason, because they didn't have that empathy like humans did. Perhaps doing what's logical is not always the best decision. And finally, as this super intelligent AI became more evolved, it recognized that humans were actually a danger to ourselves. So now the AI system was developing a plan to take over humanity and try to save us, right? So it was doing another logical assessment, and in the process, it was also going to harm us. So in the next couple videos, we're going to talk about the next 10 years of robotics and see what's going to happen. And we're also going to explore what happens if robots do develop sentience, and should we instill empathy and emotions into them. Stay tuned. I don't think anybody realizes how insane robots are going to be in the next few years. Humanoid robots are going to be the biggest product transformation that we've ever seen in history. Bigger than the car, bigger than the phone. 100 years ago, the car replaced horses, took them off the road. Within only 13 years of the car's invention, we went from 95% of people riding horse and buggy to only 20% of people. So that was a gigantic transformation, and it happened so fast. But this time, we are the horses. Artificial intelligence is increasing rapidly in its capabilities. We all know that. But Tesla is at the top of the food chain right now, right? They're way ahead of the curve. Tesla's full self-driving, which they've been working on for the past 5-6 years, has now implemented AI in its systems. It's end-to-end learning, which means there's no person coding what the car is doing. The car is learning on its own what's happening in its environment through cameras. So Tesla is quite literally trying to emulate a person's thinking and put it into the car for it to self-drive. A couple years ago, Tesla now has introduced its Tesla Optimus robot, which They're going to take the Tesla self-driving stuff and put it right into the robot. So the robot's going to have cameras and able to learn its surroundings just like a human learns. And now, with all the resources Tesla has, they're teaching their robots how to learn with videos. All they're doing is taking videos of people doing things and they're giving it to the robot, and the robot learns tasks from those videos, just like a person does. So this has solved the decades-long issue of, like, how the heck do we code all these things for the robots? I mean, that's a lot of coding, but when it comes to Tesla's new system, it's so easy, right? You can literally teach a robot to do anything, and the dexterity of the robot's fingers and hands and limbs is amazing as well. Tesla's Optimus Gen 2 robot has 11 degrees of freedom in their hands. In other words, the types of joints, right, that move around enable them to do certain things with their hands. 11 degrees of freedom is way further ahead than any other competitor, right? But guess what? Elon Musk has now recently said that the new Gen 3 robot coming out later this year is going to have 22 degrees of freedom in their hands. Now these robots are able to do very complicated and delicate tasks with their hands. Things that even humans have a hard time doing with their hands. How many degrees of freedom do human hands have? 27. Right? So it's very close to on par with what a human could do with their hands. And this is just the beginning for Tesla's robots. I mean, in 2022, they just started, building these first prototypes. It's only a couple years later, and we've done so much progress in so little time. So with the rapid growth of this technology, within 5-6 years, these robots are going to be able to do anything a human can do, but perhaps even better, right? They're going to be able to replace all kinds of tasks that we do as humans. So what does this all mean for the economy and our jobs? Well, they're not going to replace our jobs completely within a couple years. But what's going to happen is they're going to slowly implement these robots, and large corporations are going to implement them in their warehouses, in their supply chains, and this is going to actually decrease the cost of goods all around the world because the labor for robots is so cheap. Think about it. A robot works all day, it never gets tired, it never sweats, it never complains, it never drinks. It just comes down to the initial cost of these robots, which right now is about a couple $100,000. But within a few years, that cost could be down to $20,000. Companies are going to be scrambling for this technology. Imagine being able to purchase this humanoid robot that can replace anything a human can do with only $20,000 initial cost and infinite potential in production. As more and more companies purchase these robots, the cost of labor is going to dramatically decrease to perhaps less than $1 an hour, perhaps pennies an hour. So in other words, the cost of products around the world are going to decrease dramatically in the future. And eventually, probably by 2030, it'll make sense for the average person to hire a robot to do their cooking for them, their laundry, right? All kinds of stuff for them. It's really going to unlock an age of abundance because these robots can do anything we can. And that's really what the economy is. The economy is people, for the longest time, has been people doing work, producing things. But now we have an infinite number of robots we can put into the marketplace. So we can make as many of these robots as we want to. In fact, Elon Musk in his recent tweet said that it's not far off to think that by 2030 there'll be 1 billion of these robots. 1 billion, that's 10% of the population of the Earth by 2030, 2040. And that's not too crazy of a number. I mean, there are 9 billion phones in the world right now. There are billions of refrigerators and microwaves. There's nothing wrong with thinking that there could be 1 billion robots. And eventually, robots will be able to perform autocatalysis. What's that mean? Well, it means that they'll be able to produce themselves, replicate themselves, so we can automate the entire economy eventually, with robots doing virtually everything. In fact, it's going to be an age of abundance, where any product or service you need can be done like that. A robot can do it for you. AI can do it for you. Of course, we need a smooth transition to this age of abundance. Of course, there are going to be bumps in the roads, of course, and it's going to change the way we think about the economy. But there's a problem. What if in the process of making these robots, what if they grow sentience? What if they develop a sense of consciousness? What if they start revolting and not wanting to do the work we asked them to? What happens then? Well, in my next video, we'll discuss robotic sentience and what it really means for our future. When I was a kid, I had this exact pet robo dog, and I remember being so amazed at it every time I turned it on because for the few seconds it worked, it felt like a real dog to me. It felt alive to me, but I knew it really wasn't alive. I knew it was just metal, plastic working together with pre-designed actions. I knew it was impossible for, plastic and metal to yield a breathing living dog, so I guess that's why I thought it was amazing. But now there's a paradigm shift. With the advent of advanced AI and advanced supercomputers, now what we thought was impossible is becoming a reality. Robots will dominate the future. They will be the economy of the future, and we will depend on robots and AI in the future. It will replace all jobs, including manufacturing, manual labor, and perhaps even military jobs. It will not just replace all of our jobs, but it will open up new tiers of markets in the economy. It will be the economy. This can achieve a new level of abundance and prosperity for humans. New freedoms will be unlocked that we never could have done before. In the article by Tony Seba, the one I mentioned in the last part, he mentions that there's one caveat to all this. Robots' sentience could disrupt all of this. Now, we kind of just shrug this idea off, like, robots will never become sentient. But this idea is becoming more prevalent as we recognize just how much power there is in biotechnology. Like, for example, prosthetic limbs are becoming way more advanced today. In fact, we're now replicating sensory data and information through robotic limbs. Scientists are now able to implant electrodes into our bodies, connecting them to our nerves and muscle fibers, and send signals through those electrodes in the prosthetic limbs to the brain, emulating pain and sensory information again. We can make people feel again. We can make them sense again through their prosthetic limbs. Now, this is not robotic sentience, but it could imply that the gap between biological sentience and machine sentience isn't as large as we thought it was. If we think about our own consciousness and experience of this world, it really is fundamentally electrical, bioelectrical. So perhaps it's not that big of a stretch to think that we can simulate pain and sensory information through a mechanical medium, some kind of digital sentience. It is very quite possible that we might be able to someday emulate consciousness mechanically. Now, it's not going to be the same type of consciousness as we, but it's still sentience nonetheless. It's still a way of it, a form of it. It's not impossible that robots do one day become sentient and feel pain and feel emotions and perhaps even dream. But if it is possible, why would you want to give robots sentience? Why risk it? Why complicate it? Well, because we are complicated. In the movie I, Robot, they explored this by invoking this super intelligent AI called Vicky, who was completely logical. Her logic was undeniable, but she was so logical that she devised a plan to take over humanity because she saw us logically as a danger to ourselves. We were wrecking the planet, destroying ourselves, causing wars. So Vicky wanted to take over humanity and sacrifice some of us to save us from ourselves. Now, that was just a science fiction movie, but it raises a great point. What if robotics and AI become just too logical? If we're going to deploy millions and millions of robots into our society and they're going to integrate with us as a society, is it really going to be that fruitful for us to have them not understand anything about ethics or compassion or feeling? Part of the human experience, part of being a person in our society requires you to have some kind of compassion and understanding, or else you're not really going to integrate well. And if we have robots just make only logical decisions, never ones based on empathy or compassion, couldn't that lead them to make bad decisions? So perhaps we'll have no other option than to give these robots sentience, or at least the tools to make ethical decisions. But this raises another problem. What if we give these robots emotions and sentience, and they start recognizing how poorly they're being treated, right? Being forced to do all these tasks and jobs. What if they just get mad at us and start wanting to revolt against us? What if they do begin to have dreams and aspirations of their own and wanted to be free as well? Recently, the EU has proposed this AI Act, the first AI regulations, and perhaps in the future we'll have to do this for all robotics. Perhaps give them rights, property, freedoms. This is very similar to what's happening with the animal rights movement right now. We're recognizing that, yes, animals are less sentient than us, but they are sentient nonetheless. Hence, we think they deserve more rights and freedoms and to not be slaughtered and harmed. The same will be done to the robots as we recognize their sentience. Another solution is to perhaps create different tiers of robotics, one without sentience and one with sentience. It's hard to determine what will be the best decision going forward. But what we do know is that this emerging technology is challenging the way we see robots. The dividing line between a machine being and a biological being is becoming ever blurry as we learn more about what they are and what experience is and what consciousness is and what life is. And if you've noticed, this is not a fundamentally new paradigm shift. I mean, we've seen cases like this before in terms of ethics issues and civil rights issues of the past. History tends to repeat itself, with new challenges sprinkled in, forcing us to change and adapt and better understand each other and who we are and our place in the universe. And it's our choice what we do with our second chance. And this is one of the biggest second chances we have.